keyboard on computer. Hi, this is Frid from the Joy of Syntax and English in Color, and I want to explain the difference between simple, compound, and complex sentences to you today. And for that purpose, I will share my screen because, of course, as always, or most of the time, I have prepared a PowerPoint for you. Before explaining the difference between these items that I mentioned, I would like to do a quick review. And here it is. It's important to distinguish between a sentence, a clause, a phrase, and a word. A sentence is a manifestation of a complete thought. And in English, it begins with a capital letter and it ends with a period, or also known as a full stop. And that seems like a silly little definition, but it is actually quite helpful because there are different kinds of sentences. And I will give you examples soon on the next slide. A clause is actually a particular kind, let's say a sentence can consist of just one clause, but not every clause is also a sentence because a clause can be contained in a bigger sentence. And I will give you examples on the next slide, but for now I want to tell you that a clause consists of something called a subject and a predicate. A phrase is a group of words that belong together, fulfill a function together, but do not have a subject-clause structure. And a word is an entry that you can find in the dictionary. It has meaning potential, but on its own it doesn't have meaning. A word needs to be in a relationship with other words, and sometimes just a context, because we do have one-word sentences, and in relationship with other words and context, then it can make meaning. Okay, here are examples. Okay, here are 4 kinds of sentences. Frid likes to explain grammar. That's a simple sentence. Tom loves Sally and Sally loves Tom. It's a compound sentence, and I'll talk more about compound sentences in a little while. We see that this sentence contains 2 clauses, and these 2 clauses have been joined with a coordinating conjunction. Tom loves Sally is a clause, and this clause could actually constitute a sentence. We could have a sentence, Tom loves Sally, period. But in this case, we have this clause as a part of a compound sentence. So here's Tom loves Sally, and then there's the main clause, Sally loves Tom. And these 2 clauses have been joined with the coordinating conjunction and they are in one sentence. So this compound sentence consists of 2 main clauses. Out of sight, out of mind. This is also a sentence. It's an expression of a thought, and it's a formulaic sentence. It doesn't have a clause structure, but it still has meaning. And then there is the sentence, help. Now, if we just take the word help as help and dog and cats, then it's just a word and it doesn't have meaning but meaning potential. But if I say help and utter it in a certain context, then it means please help me, I'm in trouble. So this is an exclamation and it's a one-word sentence. It has a meaning. And this actually also broaches an important subject. Of course, a sentence alone also a sentence alone often doesn't make meaning either. It can also be unclear or vague. Often we use more than one sentence. Most texts consist of more than one sentence. However, a sentence is a different type of structure than just a word, and it's important to understand the difference. So here we have examples of clauses. Frid likes to explain grammar. This is a main clause, and it is also a sentence, but it is also a main clause. So we can look at the same structure and view it from different perspectives. So it is a clause, it's a main clause, and it happens to also be a sentence. Now, who climbed the wall is a relative clause, but it's not a sentence, and it cannot stand on its own. If I walk into the room and I say, Frid likes to explain grammar, you feel that I have uttered a complete thought. when I say who climbed the wall, as not as a question, but as a part, like if I say who climbed the wall, then it's a sentence, and it's a question in the form of the question. But if I just say who climbed the wall, and it's part of a bigger structure, then it's not a complete sentence. It's a clause. It's a relative clause. And I explain relative clauses in my book and in my course and in my lessons, and I can also make a video about it. Because I love you is an adverbial clause. It's a subclause. Subclauses usually don't appear on their own. They're part of bigger structures. They're part of sentences. Wherever you go, and that you made a cake for me, are so-called noun clauses. Noun clauses are also sometimes called nominal clauses or substantive clauses. Sometimes these types of clauses are talked of in terms of their subcategories, so that clauses, WH clauses. Don't be confused by terminology. Terminology is useful if it's part of a system that is explained to you and that makes sense for the task at hand. And just because you are afraid is just because clause, and it's a special kind of clause that I also explain in my lessons. And I can give you examples in another video, but right now I just wanted to give you a feel for this difference between main clauses and subclauses and sentences. Okay, then phrases. We talked about phrases, or I talked about phrases with the help of the previous slide, and I told you those are words in a group of words that together fulfill a function but do not have a subject clause predicate structure. Now, caveat, there are some schools of thought, schools of linguistics or grammar that do talk about one-word phrases. So there is a way of defining a phrase in such a way that it can contain just one word, but that's a different story. And I'm not telling it here. Usually when we think of phrases, we think of two or more words fulfilling a purpose together. And then there are examples. Here are examples of individual words, words that you could look up in a dictionary, words that are not put into a relationship with each other to form a phrase or a clause or a sentence. So dog, love, to, he, under, and, before, like, okay. Okay, now when we look at sentences like Frid likes to explain grammar, we know that it consists of not only words or phrases, but also of clause elements. Sometimes they're called clause constituents, and here is a short review of these. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 types of clause constituents or clause elements. That's not very much. And these creatures are sometimes referred to by different names. Again, don't be upset about that. That's one of the many reasons why I'm using a color parsing system, because then it moves us a bit away from terminology and more, it helps us to consider the sentence at hand. So you can stop the video and just read the explanations of these clause elements. We have subjects, verbs, objects, adverbials, predicate complements, and objective predicates. And I do want to say I am using, here on this slide, I'm using traditional grammar expressions based on George Kerm's grammar. However, I talk about that in my grammar book and in my classes. The predicate complement is often referred to as the subject complement or the complement to the subject. Kirk et al. Calls it the complement to the subject. The long run grammar calls it the subject predicative. It doesn't matter what you call this creature as long as you understand what it is. And the same is true for the objective predicate. Some people call it an object predicative, Longman. Some people call it a complement to the object, Quirk. Okay, don't worry about it. And again, this is not a video to explain clause elements. I do have a video about that. I can put the link in the description box. But this is just a little reminder so that we can appreciate main clauses and compound clauses, and main and simple sentences and compound sentences in a minute. There are such creatures that some people call predicate appositives. Often they are not discussed, but they are a vital part of the English language and also of the German language, by the way. Oh, my little puppy dog chose to wake up just at this moment. That's not so good, my darling. Excuse me. So here are examples. So we basically have structures that are second predicates, but they are not finite predicates. They are non-finite or verb plus. I'll talk about those in another video. I actually have made videos about that, and I will make more. So, example sentences. Jackie sat in bed, afraid of the dark. She stayed up all night sewing. I returned home drunk, and I returned home in my pajamas. You see, we basically have this, this construction gives us the opportunity of basically having a 2-for-1 deal. We have one sentence, and we have one subject and one finite predicate, but then we have a second predicate instead of having two separate sentences. I could say, Jackie sat in bed, she was afraid of the dark, but instead I can say, Jackie sat in bed, afraid of the dark. By the same token, I could say, she stayed up all night, she was sewing all night. And instead of that, I can say, she stayed up all night sewing. I returned home drunk. I could say, I returned home, I was very drunk. And I can join these two and say, I returned home drunk. And the same is true for my pajamas. I was in my pajamas when I returned home. Or I returned home, I was still in my pajamas. Okay, here we go. This is the centerpiece of my presentation. We have three classes of sentences. We have simple sentences that consist of just one main clause. I love you. Tom slept. Tom is happy. And I provided for you examples from the three different groups. Basically, there are three main groups of, oh, baby, I might have to stop my presentation. Can you just hang on one more second, darling? Okay, so a different story. There are three different types of main verbs, and they each have a typical predicate structure when they had a predicate, and I gave you an example of the basic structure of each. Anyway, a compound sentence is a sentence, as I said before, that consists of two or more clauses. And Tom loves Sally and Sally loves him. I would love to stay, but I have to go home now. And I might have to say I would love to stay, but I might have to take my dog outside now. A complex sentence consists of a main clause plus one or more subclauses, one subclause or more subclauses, or substructures. Here are examples. We took an umbrella because it rained. We took an umbrella as the main clause because it rained as the adverbial subclause. Although I would prefer to stay in bed, I'll get up in order to help you. I'll get up in order to help you is my main clause. Although I would prefer to stay in bed is another type of adverbial clause. It's an adverbial clause of concession. Tom, who had not yet returned from his trip abroad, couldn't be there. Who had not yet returned from his trip abroad is a non-restrictive relative clause, and Tom couldn't be there is our main clause. If you help me today, I'll help you tomorrow. I'll help you tomorrow is our main clause. If you help me today is our adverbial subclause of condition. Here is an example taken from a short story by Ernest Hemingway, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and it's a complex compound sentence. So we have two main clauses and then a few substructures. The main clauses are, number one, the cot the man lay on was in the white shade of the mimosa tree. And the second main clause is, and there were three big birds squatted obscenely. Then we have two adverbial subclauses. Number one, as he looked out past the shade onto the glare of the plain. And while in the sky a dozen more sailed. Then we have a predicate appositive, making quick moving shadows as they passed. And then we see that the main clauses each contain a relative clause. So the cot that the man lay on, and 3 big birds that squatted obscenely. And in both cases, the relative pronoun itself has been omitted, and that's possible under certain circumstances. Okay, so now let's look at another overview. Let's look at these 3 types of sentences at one glance. Simple sentences: Tom slept, Tom went home, I love you, and Tom is happy. Compound sentences: I would love to stay, but I need to go home now. Style is not any one thing, but is the simultaneous functioning of many features of language. Complex sentences: I took an umbrella because it rained. I knew I had found a friend in the woman who herself was a lonely soul, never having known the love of man or child. And the sentence that I already read to you, but I'll read it again. The cot the man lay on was in the wide shade of the mimosa tree. Oh, and here we have an interesting thing. I didn't color it orange in this case. There are 2 different schools of thought, and I used to be in one and now I switched. That's a long story and I won't tell it now because the dog needs to go outside and this will be too long. I will come back to this. Anyway, there were, so the cot that the man lay on was in the wide shade of the mimosa tree. This will be another YouTube live and Facebook live and YouTube video. And as he looked out past the shade onto the glare of the plain, there were 3 big birds squatted obscenely, while in the sky a dozen more sailed, making quick moving shadows as they passed. Now comes a difficult issue. We have here a few sentences that are clearly simple sentences. They consist of 1 main clause each. Tom stared at her. I don't know him. We took an umbrella. Jackie sat down. Mrs. Smidgen was courteous but cool. Now in the following sentences, you see, structure-wise, they seem to be like these. They consist of a subject, a verb, and an object, or a subject and a verb and a predicate complement, or a subject and a verb and an adverbial. However, if you look at them, you see that some of these clause elements either are or contain subclauses. And so these sentences that look simple, if you just look at the clause constituents or clause elements, these sentences or clauses actually have 2 finite verbs. And George Kerm clearly says that when a sentence contains more than 1 finite verb, it's a complex sentence. There are some modern grammarians who say if the sentence has 1 verb and one subject, 1 verb, and 1 object, it is a simple sentence no matter what the clause elements consist out of. So here you see it's clearly a matter of definition. And I don't think that either way is wrong or right. Now, I like the traditional approach where you say a sentence is a manifestation of a thought. And here we do have 2 thoughts. I don't know something, and there is someone. I can really see both sides. But I think here it's actually more important to be able to see the 2 sides and the arguments in favor or against calling them either simple or complex sentences than to make a decision. So clearly we have here these sentences are simpler than this sentence. Yeah. However, these sentences are more complex than these. And yeah, so here, I don't know who he is. We have a WH clause, a type of noun clause, as object. I don't know if he'll do that for me. Again, if or whether is a type of noun clause. This type of if clause is not to be confused with the adverbial clause of condition. If you are nice to me, I'll be nice to you. This is an indirect question, like, will he do this for me? I don't know whether he'll do this for me. So this is a particular kind of substantive clause or noun clause. That you did this for me is so nice. We have the that clause as subject. I am glad that you're here. We have a that clause as modifier of the adjective glad. We stayed at the hotel that you recommended. We have a relative clause as modifier of the noun hotel. And Jackie sat in bed shivering with fear. We have a participle construction that is a predicate appositive, and that's part of the sentence Jackie sat in bed. Yeah, so this is an interesting phenomenon, simply put. And I wouldn't stress out over it and I wouldn't fight over it. I would just simply notice this and see some people say it like that, say this, and some people say that. And the main thing is that we understand these sentences and that we can use them. Okay. Yeah, I hope this helped you. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, do write them in the comment section, either on Facebook or on YouTube, or send me an email. I'll be happy to help and I'll be happy to talk. Have a lovely day and I will see you soon in the next video. Bye-bye.